Hey there, my 5 faithful listeners and anyone who randomly stumbled upon this episode. My name is Lydia, and this is the Lydia Todd Pod. It's probably not a good idea to start a podcast because your last name rhymes with pod. But I'm here anyways. From spontaneous trips to special guests to deep spiritual conversations and everything in between, expect inspiration, stories, and plenty of laughter. Grab a glass of milk, settle in, and let's dive into the episode. Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. We've discussed truth and we dived a little bit into, is there such thing as a purpose? Do we as humans have a purpose? And concluded that if we think that we have a purpose, if we think that there's a moral law, if we think that we are supposed to have some reason for living, then that would lead us to having some kind of higher power, some kind of supreme good, some kind of moral standard. But I did want to hit on some more of, are there logical reasons to believe that there is a creator? Is there a logical reason to believe in a creator? I think that there are logical reasons. One of them being the moral code that humans go by. We discuss that way more in the purpose episode. So if you didn't listen to that, then you can go back and listen to it. The premise is, if there is some kind of good, some kind of evil, then there has to be some kind of lawgiver, some kind of thing that sets what is good and what is evil, if it's outside of us, if it's objective truth. And if there is some kind of good and evil in this world, then it comes from some lawgiver, so that means that there is a lawgiver. And when we say lawgiver, we mean the same thing as supreme good. We mean the same thing as creator. A lot of people use the term God to describe these things. And that is as far as we got. So morality, if God doesn't exist, then objective moral values and duties don't exist. So you can't say someone did something wrong, someone did something evil, someone did something good. Like, those don't exist. Objective moral values, I believe, do exist. Therefore, God exists. That was kind of the flow of that thought progression. There are other logical reasons for believing in a creator, and so I wanted to touch on one of those today. It is called the Kalam cosmological argument. Whenever you hear the term argument, whenever we're talking about philosophy or logical reasoning and stuff, it's not saying like, let me yell at you. It's just giving you a logical proof that you can follow to come to a conclusion about something. So this one is called the Kalam cosmological argument. What it states is, 1, whatever begins to exist has a cause. If there's something that began to exist, then it has a cause. The second thing is, the universe began to exist. The third thing is, therefore, the universe has a cause. Whatever begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist, therefore the universe has a cause. If this argument is valid, if you can't disprove any of the premises, then the conclusion follows whether you like it or not, whether you disagree or not. That's just how a logical proof works. I don't want you to just take my word for it, so we're going to talk about each of the premises and why they have been tested and still hold true. The first premise, whatever began to exist has a cause. We're not talking about the universe yet, just anything that began to exist. So you could talk about, I don't know, a mug, you could talk about a baby, you could talk about whatever, but whatever began to exist has a cause. This seems pretty intuitive, something can't come from nothing, but can we trust our intuitions in this? Is this something that we should be doubting? Personally, I don't think you should doubt your intuitions unless you have a really good reason why not to, because we have those intuitions for a reason. They usually end up showing us what is the good thing, but I understand the doubters. So we also have scientific verification to back this up. Every time we've tested something that has a beginning, it has always had a cause, and it's been verified over and over and over and over and over and over again in science. When we talk about a cause, we have to set kind of the parameters. Whenever there's a cause for something, it is a sufficient cause, meaning it's responsible for the other thing coming into being, and it is separate and apart from the thing that came into being. Obviously, you don't create yourself. When it comes to cause, there's two different I guess, types, you could say. There's material causes and then there's the efficient causes. Material cause would be, for instance, in Shakespeare, whenever he had his writings, the material cause would be the paper, the pen, the physical things that were used to create. But then the efficient cause, which is also called agent cause, it would be the person that made it come into existence. So it would be Shakespeare, the artist. So you have, in the causal realm, you have what materials is it made of, and then what made this come into being. Premise 1, everything that is created has a cause. Since that premise is pretty easily understood, we just have to figure out, does it apply to the universe? Is there a beginning of the universe, or is it just a forever and ever cycle of material cause? Is there an efficient agent of cause that began the universe? Is there something that goes beyond the material that we have? The universe, we're talking about matter, we're talking about people, planets, everything physical. We know that nothing else has come into existence from nothing. So I don't know why we would make this excuse for the universe. Why is the universe the only thing that can come from nothing? It really does go against our intuitions and scientific verification, but I guess if you've been told that so many times, or if you're really stubborn and don't want to consider other possibilities, then that would lead you to make an exception to the rule. I don't know why it would be the universe and not something else. Like, why can't I make my book here come into existence from nothing? Or why don't we see other random things coming into existence from nothing anywhere else in history except for the universe? That doesn't really make sense, which leads us to the second premise, which is the universe began to exist. If this premise is true, if the first premise is true and the second premise is true, then we have the third statement. Therefore, the universe has a cause. If this premise is not true, then we don't know if the third statement is true or not. There's a couple different reasons why the second premise holds true. First, we can look at it from a philosophical standpoint. So, in math, we have infinites. We talk about infinity and we can use it in mathematical equations, and that's fine. It works theoretically. But when we apply it to the real world, infinites don't work. Actual infinites don't exist in the real world. Potential infinites do exist. We understand mathematical theory, but actual infinites don't exist. An actual infinite is where you have a collection of whatever item or thing, a collection of a whole, which when you put it to a 1-to-1 ratio with the whole collection of everything that would exist in that collection, it matches. So the part, like a part of something, is equivalent to the whole of something. So you could keep adding to the collection to infinity, but the collection size would never change. We would never get to the infinity if number. It would just stay the same, even though we're making it bigger, which already doesn't logically follow. But I'll try to give some examples, which the examples don't make sense because actual infinites don't make sense. But for the point of this, we need to explain, whenever we're talking about reality and we're talking about actual infinites, they call it an actual infinite temporal regress. So something that is events, time, temporal. So an infinite amount of events happening back to back to back to back to back, forever and ever, both directions. So you have something happening forever in the past and forever in the future. Well, regress would imply the past. So we're not even talking about the infinite future. We're just talking about the infinite past. If the universe has an infinite past, if you think that we have an event now and we had an event yesterday and the day before and the day before, and that forever and ever in the past the universe always existed, that is a temporal regress. Because you're saying, I think that it's infinity in time, which is an actual infinite. So you're saying you can apply infinity to the material, to the physical world, to reality. This does not work in real life. It does work in mathematics. Like, you can have infinity plus infinity equals infinity, but that doesn't work in the real world. Imagine my book here has an infinite amount of pages. Like, It goes on forever. And I want to write and finish this book. So that would be an infinite thing in the temporal, something that I want to complete, something that I want to have progression. Like, I want there to be change. I want this book to be more complete the more pages I write. If there's an infinite amount of pages, then in real time, as I'm writing one page and I flip to the next page, there's still going to be the same amount of pages to complete. It will infinitely go on. There is a analogy with a hotel room called Hilbert's Hotel. You guys can look it up. I'm not going to try to explain it because honestly, it doesn't really make much sense. It has to do with if you have an infinite amount of hotel rooms and then an infinite amount of guests, then one more person shows up. How do you make room for more if the room's are already full, but you would just move everyone up because infinity, there's still more possibilities and you would make room where there was no room? That doesn't work in real life. It works in mathematics, not in real life. If I had an infinite amount of books and then I removed 20 of them, sold them, burned them, I would still have those 20. Like, I would still have the infinite amount of books because in infinity, whenever you take the part is always equivalent to the whole because it's infinity. So actual infinites do not exist. Infinite temporal regresses, so saying I'm going to trace backwards in time to infinity, that doesn't exist. It would be a paradox. We would still be living 10 years ago today, and 1,000,000 years ago today, and 5,000,000 years ago today. There wouldn't really be any progression in things. Like, how did we get to today if there was an infinite yesterday? If time is infinite in the past, then you don't really have progression of time. It just doesn't work in the real world. So no matter how old you think the universe is, ultimately, we're going to go back far enough and get to a beginning. Since it can't be infinitely existing in the past, we have to get to some beginning. And that's where we get to a bunch of different theories about how the universe began. We're getting to the part of the episode where I'm going to say a bunch of scientists' names because I want you to be able to fact check whatever I'm saying, but know that I'll probably say the names wrong. My apologies. I'll try my best. Well, I think I can say this one. Einstein. He was the one who proposed, back in the day of Einstein, proposed that the universe is either expanding or contracting. Like, there is physical change in the universe, so it's either expanding from some central force thing, which would mean that there's a cause to the universe, or it's contracting. So maybe it was forever, ever, ever big, and it's getting smaller and smaller and smaller, and then it'll have an end. Expanding would necessitate a beginning. So Einstein obviously didn't want that. He didn't have to face that. And that's when he introduced this thing called the fudge theory, which, if you understand the terminology of fudging something, it means, like giving it a little something extra to get to where you want to be. And that's what he did with the theory. Without a fudge factor, every researcher that tested it, including a guy named Alexander and a guy named George Lemaitre, and without the fudge factor, you have an expanding universe. You have a beginning. So didn't want that. That's why we have the fudge factor existing for a while. Then Hubble comes along with his like little telescope, and he sees this thing called the redshift. So the redshift is, he points the telescope, and no matter where he points it, all he sees are planets moving away from Earth. So Hubble sees the redshift, points it out to Einstein. We have Einstein being like, man, biggest mistake of my life, the fudge theory. And so he retracts it. It's like, wasn't it? So we have different evidences that led all of those researchers to say the universe is definitely expanding. Then you get to the 1900s. And this is during the 1900s. So most scientists at that time thought like the universe is just eternal. It's not changing. It's just, whatever it is. But if there's change, then there's time. If there's change, then expansion, contraction, there's a beginning if there's expansion. So new evidence of the redshift and general relativity predicts this beginning of the universe. So they're saying, wow, actually the universe did begin to exist. Even though it took us this long in history to figure this out, it did begin to exist. And now we have to figure out, what does that mean? If the universe began to exist, then how did that happen? So once you get past, all of the redshift, the change in the theories, because everyone has to figure out a way that the universe came into existence, a lot of this points to God, but many scientists don't want to consider something that's metaphysical, something that's not something you can study. And so trying to come up with all of the reasons aside from God that the universe could come into existence. Stephen Hawking is a really famous researcher. Sure, you've heard his name. And so he is a guy that was looking into singularity of the universe coming into existence from nothing. That was his idea he was trying to prove. And we're getting way closer to modern time. Hawking has this, he kind of, I don't know if he produced the idea or perfected the idea, but he definitely was a big proponent for the universe. Since it had a cause, we know it had a cause. Since it had a cause, it comes from nothing, which, like we said earlier in the Kalam argument, everything that began to exist has a cause. And so he's breaking all the rules, making an exception, but maybe he's right. We should check it out. This was checked out by some guys named Alan, Alexander, and I forgot the last guy's name. There's like 3 of them. And it's called the Bordguth-Lincoln theory. So they presented it to Stephen Hawking. I thought this was savage. They presented it to him at one of his birthday parties. He was probably in his 70s or 80s. And these guys show up thinking, oh, he's going to be so happy to see this. Because at least one of them, I don't know if all of them were, but at least Lincoln, I think, one of them was agnostic. Like, God doesn't believe in God. So he doesn't think that this is going to upset Hawking. Or maybe they're just like, oh, Hawking didn't know this. He'd be so excited to find out the news of our new discovery. But in their research, they proved that any universe, whether it's a Big Bang cosmological universe, whether it's a quantum theory universe, whatever universe it is, no matter the universe, if the universe has been expanding for any duration of time. So if we can prove that from 2,000 years ago to right now, the universe has been expanding. If at any time a universe has been expanding, then that universe must have a beginning. That was their research. And they presented it to Hawking. I'm sure that Hawking was not happy about that, but there's no escaping that the universe has a beginning. And I don't think that there's any escaping the first premise of everything that begins to exist has a cause. And so if you can't disprove either of those, then therefore the universe must have a cause. And the guy Lincoln, who was an agnostic on that theory, he is quoted saying, I heard this quote from one of my friends quoted this in his podcast, and I thought the quote was spitting fire, so I'll just read it. Alexander Lincoln, he said, "It is said that an argument is what convinces reasonable men, and a proof is what it takes to convince even an unreasonable man. With the proof now in place, cosmologists can no longer hide behind the past eternal universe. There is no escape. They have to face the problem of a cosmic beginning." So he was saying even dumb people can't argue with a proof. You can argue with an argument, but you can't argue with a proof. And so since there's a proof in place of a cosmic beginning because our universe is expanding, then you have to figure out where it came from. What's the cause? So we have logic, we have philosophy, we have science. We also have the laws of thermodynamics, because the second law of thermodynamics says that the universe will eventually come to a state of equilibrium as it expands. It'll grow cold, dark, void, and all scientists believe in the laws of thermodynamics. So if the universe is constantly expanding, slowly running out of its usable energy, and it's going to experience heat death one day, if that's true, then it can't be past eternal, because we would already have experienced heat death. We would have already run out of usable energy. We would have already perished. So that's another reason why you can't have an infinite temporal regress, why you can't have an infinite past in an expanding universe, in our time-bound physical universe. It just doesn't work in real life. So the cause of the universe, because you get to premise 3, therefore the universe has a cause. So the cause for the universe, it has to be something outside of the universe. We talked about a sufficient cause, something that's separate from the thing, because if it's a part of the universe, if it's something within the universe, you run into the same problem of either that thing has a cause, or you're saying that that thing is infinite in the past, but that doesn't work because it's bound by the laws of our universe because it's within the universe. So it has to be something outside, something that could cause the universe to exist. Since it is outside of the universe, you get these definitions of what that thing is. So we already know that if you go by morality, if there's a moral law, then you have a moral lawgiver. So we know that this thing is the supreme good, the thing that sets the laws across time. But what else can define this supreme being? Well, you have a spaceless being because it created space. You have a timeless being because it created time. You have an immaterial being, so something not physical because it created all the things that are physical. You have something that's not caused because it is the cause. It began cause because it caused everything else to exist. You have something that has the adequate power to create the universe, which is pretty powerful. Like, really, really powerful, because it has to have more power than what it created. And you have something that is a personal being, not a human, obviously it's not a physical human, but something that's personal because it's not bound by a certain law of interactions. So when a professor, I believe from Oxford, had set out all the types of causal explanation. So you have either a law acting on initial conditions, so something that is bound that makes things, kind of like we have when we talked about material causes versus agency causes. So the material cause is something that is bound by initial conditions. For instance, I can create something materially with marble, but I can only create of marble what marble allows me to create. Or another thing would be the laws of nature. So lightning can strike, earthquakes can happen. All of that happens because of what it's bound within. You don't have, hurricanes happening in outer space because hurricanes are bound by the laws of nature within certain conditions. And so you either have a cause that is bound by laws that's acting on initial conditions, so something that's already set up, which would mean that it had something to set a law for, or you have personal agents acting on their will. So, for instance, I am not forced to create a book, but I can, if I choose to, acting on my will. That kind of creation is a different cause than the laws of nature or something being bound. Since we know that whatever this thing is the ultimate moral, is what sets the moral standard. It's not bound by the same standards that we are. We're bound by space and time and physical material limitations, but this being is outside of those things, so it doesn't have those limitations. So that's why you can conclude that the thing is also personal. So we have a spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, personal, moral being. So from the last episode, we just had, something that's good, but now that we have all of these other attributes, I think it's a lot safer to be like, yeah, that's God. That's what we mean when we say God. Now we just have to figure out, what is this God? Does this God want anything to do with us? Is there anything that we can learn about this God? Should we? Are we supposed to? Is there something that this God has set us up here for? Do we have some kind of purpose? Do we have some kind of purpose other than just existing because this God created us? So the moral and the Kalam arguments, they establish that there is a God. We just have to figure out who is this God and what should it mean for us. In general, we can conclude that God exists. If you have any questions about any of the proofs or arguments that I mentioned in this episode, feel free to reach out. I will include my email in the podcast notes below. I really am excited to start exploring more about this God because I think that will help us get closer to figuring out what our purpose is and ultimately what is the truth that we as humans should know. I know this is a weird way to end an episode, but I was just thinking about logically how if there's a God, then there's this path, we have this progression of time, things are leading to something, we don't know what it is yet, but it reminds me of this vine the one that's like, road work ahead? Yeah, I sure hope it does. Because if there's some path that we're supposed to follow and we're wondering, does it matter? Does it work? Is this good for us? All those things, like, I sure hope it does. As we wrap up this episode of the Lydia Todd Pod, I want to express my heartfelt gratitude for you spending time with me. This really challenges my belief that I only have 5 consistent listeners. If you have any thoughts, topics, or questions you'd like me to explore further on future episodes, please reach out on one of my socials. I hope that our conversations have brought you inspiration and joy. If you have friends or family who might be interested in our conversations, don't hesitate to share the podcast with them.